Some people say that using samples and loops is cheating, that it's lazy, that it makes you less of a musician. And to those people, I say, okay, Beethoven, chill out. Yes, if you just drag and drop a loop into your track and call it a day, that's lazy. But when used correctly, loops can actually elevate your music, inspire creativity, save your time, and make your song sound way better. So today I'm gonna show you everything you need to know about using samples and loops in your track. How to find and choose the right sounds, how to fit them to the BPM and to the key that you're working with, and then how to make them uniquely yours. Let's hop in. Just because you can drag and drop a bunch of loops into your track in about 3 seconds doesn't mean you should, because that's probably about how long people will actually listen to your song for. Loops can actually sound amazing if you use them with, thought. Instead of picking the random sounds like you're blindfolded in Guitar Center, try having a plan. What should your loops sound like? What's the vision of your track? What's the vibe you're going for? If you don't know that yet, congratulations, you have ears. Go listen to some songs in the genre that you're trying to make. What kind of snare do they use? How do their hi-hats groove? Think of this like using Google Maps. You're gonna get to where you're going way faster if you actually put in the address. Otherwise, you're just driving around and hoping. To prove that this works and to make this easier to understand, I'm gonna build a track from scratch, step by step, and I'll start with the drums. For this song, I'm envisioning an indie pop feel-good type track. That means I'll find samples that reflect that. Oftentimes with starting with drums in Logic, I like to open Drum Machine Designer and then drag all my samples into here. This lets me use each one as MIDI later on. That sounds good to me. I like that clap, the cool sounding tom, and bammo. And if I do like this kit, I can always save it later by going into empty kit. I'll rename it. I'll click save here, samples kit.patch, save. And now anytime you want to use it, you can find it in user patches and load it in. All right, so now our samples are meshing together better than a can of sardines, but less gross. It's time to move on to one of the most crucial parts of using loops, making sure the timing doesn't sound like it was thrown together by a toddler. Timing isn't something that you really have to worry about for one-shots or samples like we used in our drum kit. But for loops, they can be a big problem. Unfortunately for you, the millions of loops out there that have been created were not specifically designed for your track. Devastating news. That means if you drag a loop in without checking the timing, there's an extremely high chance it's gonna sound like doodoo garbage. Luckily, most DAWs make this stupidly easy to fix, so if you don't, that's on you. My first tip involves to choose loops that are already close to your song's tempo. My song's tempo is at 108, so I've tried to find some loops in that same ballpark. Let's start with this one at 115. Not perfectly 112, but absolutely close enough to work. There are a few ways to fix timing, and most of them are the same in most DAWs, but I'll show you how to do it in Logic. Let's start with the most technical way to do this in Logic that gives you the most options to mess around with. Double-click on the file here to open up the editor window, go into File, go into Functions, go into Time and Pitch Machine. Then you can put in the original tempo, which in this case was 115. Then you can put in the new tempo, which you want it to be, which is 108. You can also change the algorithm up here if you're feeling spicy, process and paste, and it will automatically fit the new track. Let's go over the other two methods. Second method is also pretty easy. Double click on here, go into Smart Tempo, click Analyze. After Logic analyzes the track, you can click on Edit and apply project tempo to region and downbeat. Check it out. Boom. Wow. It will automatically fit to whatever the track tempo is. And the last method that I use is just time stretching the actual audio itself. You can do that in Logic with your mouse super easily. Just make sure you're holding down Option, go down to the bottom half of the region. That's important. If you go to the top, nothing will happen. But if you go here, you'll get this little guy. When you get that, you can either squish it down or you can expand it out depending on what the tempo is. I know that this is 95 and I'm trying to get to 108, which is a faster tempo, so I'm going to squish it. If we check it out, it fits perfectly. I'll say that one more time because it can be kind of confusing, but if the sample loop is slower than your project, you'll have to squish it down. If the sample loop is faster than your project, then you'll have to expand it out. Pretty easy, right? But there's one more thing I want to talk about that I hear with amateur sample users that just irks me. And that has to do with swing. Swing is basically how the 8th or the 16th notes feel. Instead of landing perfectly on the grid, a swung beat slightly pushes some of them off so that it feels a little bit more human. I'll slowly adjust this swing beat to go from straight to extra swung so you can hear what I'm talking about. Normal. You You can hear the laggingness of that eighth note. It gives it a certain characteristic. So if your loop isn't locking in or it just feels weird, swing might be the problem. Let me demonstrate how a loop might clash with a swung beat versus a not swung beat. I've added some swing to my beat in Logic by going here and then clicking on swing. But now you can hear that the hi-hats don't perfectly line up at this section. We can easily fix that in Logic by clicking on our loop here, making sure that time stretch is on, going up to region, going to quantize, and clicking 16th note. When we click 16th note, we'll see Q swing right here. We can put the Q swing to the exact same number that it was on our drum kit. And when we play this back, they'll be perfectly locked together. You can also do this the opposite way around. If your loop is too swung, you can make it straight time with this same feature. This swung technique probably isn't relevant for 80% of you guys, but I've heard it so many times that I had to address it. But before moving on, this video is proudly brought to you by the like button, because without it, I would have to get a real job. So if you've enjoyed this video so far, go smash that thing. Or gently tap it. I'm not here to tell you how to live your life. Now that our loops and samples actually fit to the timing of our song, we can begin on the next step, matching the key. Once again, the millions of loops out there weren't custom made for your song, and they definitely don't care about what key you chose. But with the magic of computers, we can definitely make it match the ideas we already have. In music, we call this transposing, and most DAWs have a knob to do just that. If you use loops a lot, you'll have to get familiar with this process because you'll be doing it all the time. So I have two loop ideas I want to add to my song, but I already have a chord progression and bass line that I like. Check it out. And check out what my samples sound like all together. Not great. I have a couple methods I can use to make sure that these sound good. The first method involves me just going here, clicking on the region up here, and then transposing it one semitone at a time until I figure out what sounds good. Or I can be a lot more methodical about it. Most of the samples that you'll download will have the key that they're in right here. In this case, A minor. I know that my bass line happens to be in F sharp minor, or A major. And if you don't know what that means or why that is, then you should watch this video up here about all of the music theory that music producers need to know. So if I know that one is in A minor and one is in F sharp minor, I can count the notes between those to find how much I should transpose it. In this case, 1, 2, 3. I can also go up if I want to make this sound higher. So that means 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. I can either go down 3 or up 9. Let's try up 9 to see what that sounds like. Already fits way better. Let's do the same thing for this pad. For longer loops, you may find that the chords that they're playing at that particular time don't exactly line up with the rest of your song. Check it out. Okay, but it could sound a whole lot better. To make this long loop better fit in, I'm going to slice it up and then individually transpose each part. So I've chopped this up and transposed each individual part so that it works with the chords I have, but one still isn't working, and let me explain why. This second chord happens to be a minor chord that we have in the pad itself, but it happens to be a major chord in the actual chord progression. If we have a C major chord in our actual chord progression, and I'm dealing with a, I don't know, G minor, if I transpose it up, it's still going to be a minor chord, which means that our major chord up top has this third here, major third, and our minor chord is gonna have that minor third. Played together, it's gonna sound not good. No amount of transposing will change that minor chord to fit with that major chord. So you have a couple of options you can do. You can either copy and paste another part of the sample that uses a major chord, which I'll do in this case. Or I'll show you a more advanced way in a second that will give you even more control over your sound. But check out what this sounds like after just copying and pasting a major loop, transposing it. Your samples and loops are actually in time and actually in key. Congratulations. You're not making audio spaghetti. But here's the problem. So is everybody else. I mean, think how ridiculously easy it was for you to just drag and drop these samples into your DAW. How long did it take you? Like 3 seconds, maybe? If it was that easy for you, it was probably just as easy for hundreds of other producers using the exact same sounds in their beat. And you don't want to sound like everyone else, right? Right. Let me show you 4 different ways that you can use to help differentiate your sound. My first way is one of my favorites, and it definitely makes the sound less samply. You do so by messing with the formants. Formants will shift the actual EQ spectrum itself, but it won't change the pitch. I use this most often on vocals. Let me show you what I mean. Go into pitch, go into vocal transformer, and change the formant here. Taking away formant usually makes the voice more monstrous, and adding formant makes it more mousy, for lack of a better term. But both higher and lower formants will make the sample less recognizable. On to method number 2, which is actually changing the notes. If you want to get a little bit fancier, you can go into the individual sample, even if there's multiple notes being played, and mess around with it. Let me show you how to do that. If you have a single note or melody, you can do this in Logic. You can go up to flex pitch right here. Logic will analyze all of the notes that it's playing, and then you can individually edit every single one. The farther away you get from the original sound, the weirder it sounds, but you can get some cool results. Randomly put some stuff around. You can also do this better with third-party plugins, and my favorite third-party plugin to do this with is called Melodyne. If you transfer the audio into Melodyne, it will analyze each individual note that was played in a chord. All we have to do is go up to the algorithm, choose polyphonic, in this case sustain, we'll redetect, and you'll see individual notes being played. We can edit individual notes of this chord now. Check it out. I want to make a little melody at the end, just a little scoop up here. This is that advanced way that I was talking to fix major and minor chords if they're conflicting with each other. You can just go in, find that minor or major third that's the problem, and switch it to the opposite. The third method I like to use for changing up sounds involves processing. Sometimes just adding delay, reverb, or distortion is all you need to change it up from sounding super sampley to something new and exciting. Don't be afraid to add more exciting plugins too, like a chorus or a flanger or who knows what. You can do whatever you want. And the last method I use to differentiate sounds is by chopping them up. You can do this like I did manually before, but there's also some easy ways that you can do it in Logic or in most DAWs. For example, if I take this voice here and I drag it to an empty slot, I can click on Quick Sampler Optimize and it will automatically choose and make a synth using this. Oh, there it is. Let's go to one shot or slice, change the transient sensitivity, and all of a sudden I can play it on the piano. Let me mute this one and I'll come up with an idea of chopping up this vocal to make it even cooler. Now you've turned that basic loop into something that sounds way different than it did before. All of these methods that I just mentioned will help you turn your samples and loops into your own unique sound. And if you layer these techniques together, you're almost guaranteed to get something that's never been heard before. Or at the very least, something that sounds way less sampley. Loops and samples are not the enemy. Bad production choices are. If you just drag and drop sounds without thinking, it's gonna sound bad. But if you actually take the time to flip them, tweak them, and make them your own, even the most overused sample will sound completely unique. If you like this video on how to flip samples, you should probably consider adding some live instruments to help balance out your song. Here's a great video I made right up here on how to record studio quality vocals from home.